I'm Andy Cook with Harbor Food Service. I'm the resident restaurant consultant. My area of expertise is front of house and operations. This video is a companion piece for the Restaurant Restart Sanitation Protocols and Sanitation Checklists. Now, Phase 2 is now open. So dining rooms, if you qualify, you can be serving the public within your building, which is be a nice change of pace after the last few months. But a big part of that is developing a plan around how you're going to execute these things. And it's not just about the regulations and guidelines. There's considerations on what are your resources and the availability of products that you're going to need to execute these plans. And the biggest piece is going to be what's the public think about this? What are those consumer expectations? So let's start to dive into that, and then we'll get into some actual actionable insights and data that you can use to consider what your plan's going to be. The first one is, of course, your regulations and guidelines. That information is, it's not that hard to find, and frankly, there's not a lot of wiggle room there, so we don't really need to spend a lot of time, but this is going to be one of your main consideration points. Nothing is going to matter until you're able to satisfy these requirements. The next, and that's going to be pretty nebulous. I'm not sure where you are as an operator in terms of your finances or the resources you have available, or when it comes to personal protective equipment or maybe plexiglass dividers, stickers, signs. A lot of these things, how are you going to get them? We're going to help you with that as well. And then there's the where is this in your priority and what's your timeline? Now, as we start to move into the next slide of consumer expectations, I can tell you that we'll get into this a little bit further soon and spend a lot of our time talking about this, but just because these regulations are open doesn't mean that people are ready to follow them. Most surveys and data that's been collected pretty recently states that a lot of people feel like this is a little bit too soon, and so they're going to be proceeding with an abundance of caution like we may not be prepared for. But some of those key consideration points under this consumer expectations are: what are people's sanitation priorities? What are the differences in demographics? And we can slice that up in a few different ways. What are their comfort levels? And most importantly, what are their trust levels? There's a couple of really illuminating data points that we'll get into a little bit that's going to really inform how you're going to execute what your plan is going to be. Now, as you can see on the bottom left of the screen, our primary source here is Data Essentials. I highly recommend that you follow that web link and look for their coronavirus research. They've opened up their resources and their what they do well, the data gathering, to the public, and it's very illuminating. They've been doing it week by week. I recommend that you look into that. So let's dive more into consumer expectations. Now, as you can see from this graph, consumer concern over COVID-19 is trending down, but it still remains pretty high. The last report was 56%, and I would suspect that it hasn't changed much since then. Maybe it's even gone up. Now, when asked, is the beginning of May the right time to reopen public spaces, most people say it's either much or slightly too soon. The just rights or the slightly too lates. Now, they may not be your key demographic. Now, you're going to have to start considering things across a lot of different consideration points. Are your typical diners older? Are they baby boomers? Do they tend to lean Democrats or Republicans? Because attitudes are going to be different, and I'm not here to give you an opinion on this. I'm here to give you insight. And so what everything is going to come down to is that you are taking measures that go beyond what you have to do. And because everything that you do that is more than what you have to do to get away with are things that are going to be engendering trust. And that is where you're going to be, that's really the point that you're going to be surviving on. Now, current attitudes about dining in restaurants. Now, 67% say that they will dine cautiously, and that's good, because some data points that aren't in this presentation show that people miss going out to restaurants more than they miss just about any other aspect of being sheltered in place for so long. This represents a return to normalcy, especially amongst boomers, by the way. Now, here's some basic data dumps. Trust in locally owned restaurants is higher than in chain restaurants. Boomers, like I mentioned before, 24%, and Gen Xers, 20%. So older people, people with either completely or partially gray hair, they plan to support local restaurant brands. So that may not just be the individual operator, but an operator that may have a few different restaurants, but are noticed to be local. That's going to be really important to a lot of people. The boomers are the most anxious to dine out at 71%, but they're also the most concerned about the risks of dining out at 77%. And so when we start getting into your sanitation protocols and how you're going to change your operations, performance is going to be a key part of that. It's not just enough that you're doing it. It's about showing how much that you're doing. And I think that one of the most important consideration points is the 72% of people surveyed do not trust others to act responsibly. Now, that's where it's going to get pretty uncomfortable for a lot of operators, because we are in a yes industry, and it's hard enough to cut somebody off, much less try to correct a diner's behavior for the sake of other diners. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So some key takeaways is that concern is still high. So your sanitation plan should be comprehensive, consistent, and performed openly. I can't stress enough how much you need to perform what your sanitation practices are. Diners that you do have, they're going to be cautious. I think we're probably going to see a brief influx of people that just want to have that experience again. But time will tell. We don't know what that's going to look like, but data suggests, and a lot of polls suggest, that people are going to be phasing themselves back into this world. Now, your sanitation protocols are going to be scrutinized. It used to be keep your bathroom clean, and people are going to trust that your kitchen's clean, but we have been inundated with a lot of reports and a lot of news that is going into a lot of key details, and people are looking at sanitation in ways that they never have before in a mass awareness kind of a way. And so there's probably going to be a lot of hand wringing going into this, and we should be ready and aware of it. The most important thing, I think, is that trust in others is low. So your plan should include setting expectations for aspects of the diner's behavior. I think that by far and large, most people are going to be pretty cooperative, but again, we're going to talk a little bit more about this as we go on. What do you do about those diners who just want to cough into the air, or are they going to let their toddlers just kind of wander around a dining room and touch everything that's within sight? Having an idea of how that should be addressed is going to be key, and empowering your staff to mitigate some of those circumstances, preparing them for that is going to be important as well. So, operational adaptations. So, we can't really address every conceivable nuance that covers every conceivable restaurant. The industry is so unique and expansive that people are taking their own approach to a lot of things. So our hope is that we can give you some really key insight points and cover some areas, and enough of those areas that it'll start to illuminate some of the darker corners that you may not be considering. And your implementation tactics are going to be have to be followed pretty cohesively, and so we've organized our information in such a way that we probably haven't left a whole lot out, and let's just hope that remains to be the case. So what do you want to ask yourself going into this? Here are a few key questions. So one being, what sort of changes have we made or plan to make to adjust our restaurant's physical spaces? That's your distancing of tables. It's not just enough to have your tables 6 feet apart, but you've got to have 6 feet between diners. So some of your tables may need to be 8 or 10 feet apart. What do you do about booths? Those are other considerations. What's my plan to approach your procedural changes? So the employees that you have coming back to work, they're not going to be coming back to work with the same muscle memory that they left with. There's going to be a lot of new procedural changes, such as contact tracing. You're going to want to have to, that's part of the guidelines, that you have to record and keep information for 30 days. So how are you going to How much staff consideration have you put into your plan? I think that you're going to have to retrain a lot of people in a lot of different ways because they're not coming back with the same muscle memory, and you're not offering the same work environment. There's going to be extra steps, procedures, and policies that you're going to have to follow, and you're really going to want to have your staff's buy-in on this. They have to feel safe. They have to feel safer than your diners. Physical spaces. Now, you want to mount your hand sanitizers near shared spaces. We have table spacings, we've got plexiglass or other space dividers, 6 feet of social distancing floor stickers. There's going to be a lot of signage and communication pieces that you're probably going to want for the sake of trust and display to not just have a handwritten sign that's stuck into a plastic envelope and slapped up on a door. Now, Harbor's ready to provide you with some customized signage and stickers and other things that you can print on your own and tape to the ground or put in a frame yourself, all the way down to sending them to a print shop. So don't hesitate to get a hold of us. We've got those resources developed and being developed. And like I said, we're ready to customize some of these things so that you can present yourself in a professional manner. Procedural changes. So, how are you going to handle seating if you're taking reservations? Text alert is probably going to be one of your best methods. People can wait in their car. You never know what the weather is going to be like. And like I said before, recording additional guest information in the case of necessary contact tracing. I urge you to look into the phase 2 reopening plans to find out what sort of documentation that they're going to want you to record. You also want to consider how you're going to do it. If you're doing it on an iPad that's being shared by everybody, what sort of procedures are you going to put in place to ensure that that piece of shared device is being sanitized? Shared use of dining items like condiments, salt, peppers, etc. Those are going to have to be sanitized between uses, or you're going to have to go into packets, and that's going to add an additional expense as well. Utensils and napkins, some restaurants are wrapping them individually. Whatever your method of service is, you want to start to consider a lot of those little points as well. And your PPE protocol. So who's got to wear the gloves, where, when, how. And then there's even extra considerations. For instance, maybe you have servers that wear eyeglasses that are constantly fogging up when they're wearing their masks. There are some simple ways that you can defog or set your glasses up to not fog up. One being wash them briefly with soap and rinse them off. That creates a film. Shaving cream will do that as well. Staff considerations. Pre-shift wellness checks, those are super common. Redefining your job roles that incorporate your new systems and your new procedures, communicating what those things are and creating talking points, and even practicing those with your team so that when they're asked questions, when people that are very aware of sanitation, health, and safety, when they're asking some of these probing questions, that your front of house staff, the people that are interacting with your diners, are prepared to have a dialogue around those. As you prepare your staff for what's coming next, one key point is to establish how do you deal with other guests. I'm talking about the guests who just want to cough in the air like they're a germ sprinkler, or they're going to let their toddlers run around and touch everything that they can reach. It's hard enough to cut somebody off. It's hard enough to say no to a modifier. It's going to be even harder to start to challenge what their comfort level is, or how do you talk to them about these considerations in a way that doesn't make them feel morbidly embarrassed. You're going to have to find the tone that works best for you. Start having that staff dialogue now. You've got some people on your staff that are very clever with interacting with people, and you can't be everywhere at once. Having that dialogue with your staff in full view of the rest of your staff is going to give them the tools to handle these instances as they arrive. Here's an idea that when I heard, I really liked it. And for future contact tracing, if you've got the staffing for it, consider segmenting your staff into work groups. So in this example, group A, B, C, etc. So you don't have this homogenous group of people that are, I'm working with this person and this person on Monday, but these two other people on Tuesday. If you're able to consolidate your employees into groups in case there is a case pops up in your house, that you're able to do really effective contact tracing. That could be the key to bouncing back safely amongst your diners, that they can see that you took those extra precautions and you're able to nip the whatever in the whatever. Now we're into sanitation checklists. What we've done is we wanted to create a step-by-step, category-by-category of your operations so that you can go around to all of these areas and start to really dive into the details. And for most of us, our restaurants, we can walk around with our eyes closed, assuming it wasn't full. And that creates a lot of blind spots. And so the purpose of these checklists, again, isn't to be covering every conceivable circumstance or piece of equipment, but to start pointing out enough that you start to pay attention to some of those little things along the way. So we're going to start with the front of house, the guest-facing stuff. We're talking about door handles, hand railings, your front desk area, the lobby. Those are the obvious ones. When you really start to dive into it, I think right now the phase 2 regulations are single-use paper menus. Now, if your website is mobily responsive, if it looks good on a phone and your menu can be well presented on a phone and it's current, share a link with your diners. I think that they'd probably rather use that piece of technology in their pocket, even if it's not that sanitary. It's theirs, and you're driving traffic to your website. It's going to help you with your SEO and a lot of other things down the line. How are you going to handle check presenters, or will you even use them? What about your server books? I was a server for years. I don't think I washed my book that much, let's be honest. And pens, most people are going to be moving away from cash, and so it's going to be even more cards. And so how are you going to handle that? Again, a lot of this is about performance. And so encouraging people to use their own pen is great, but if you want to go to the store and go to the dollar store and buy the cheapest box of pens you can, I can't imagine it would cost you more than $1. You can just give them away as you use them. Now, employee spaces. Some of these are going to be well in view. I encourage any of you with a show kitchen, which are really common, that you start to consider how your kitchen looks. That space between the kitchen and the dining room, that invisible wall is an invisible wall, so people can still see everything that happens there, just like they can on server stations. And so, you want to consider that. Again, I'm just going to keep on pressing the importance of putting a performance to things, but your point of sale systems, your server stations, the telephone and keypad at the front desk, your bar areas. A lot of these are, you probably see this on a list. I don't even read them to you, but are you considering not only those things that are touched by multiple hands, how are you addressing that in a comprehensive, obvious way so you can continue to instill trust and confidence in your diners? Restrooms. Now, oddly enough, I don't believe there was any real language, comprehensive language about restroom etiquette or restroom protocols in the phase 2 documentation, but that's going to be the first thing that people were thinking about 6 months ago. It's going to be the first thing they're thinking about now. And so is your checklist going to include stall doors and handles, the toilet flush handles, your soap dispenser with the push plates? You're going to have a sort of a sanitation associate as you move into this sort of thing. And these are going to be people that are going to be going along, checking these things on repeat over and over again, especially while your dining room is occupied. We're moving into the back of house. Are you looking at the handles of all of your equipment doors? What about your ice scoops? You've got your freezer handles. You've got the your 3-compartment sink and your dish machine in general. The counters don't always, or the railings, or the trough that feeds the front of it. Oddly enough, the chemical and janitation area is often one of the dirtiest places in the restaurant. You might probably have to start circling back with your attention and touching on those things. And there's a locker and personal storage. It's not always going to be about inspiring confidence and trust with your diners, but your staff. I think that having the trust of your staff that they are in as safe of an environment as you can create for them is going to be key, because those are your frontline people. Those are the people that are your best marketers and probably your greatest asset. Now, the office. The office is probably the least sanitary place in a restaurant. So are you going through there and touching on your keypad, the manager's computer, your desks and chairs, the door handles, server bags? What about the break table? What are your protocols going to be for you full service restaurants that have multiple servers being ready to check out at the same time? How are you going to handle that sort of thing? Those are key considerations to keep in mind. And then again, like I said before, you got to walk through it and figure out how you can personalize this with even more detail for your operations. Through these documents, through some of these considerations, and I encourage you to bring in multiple people on your team to help you develop this plan so that you have a multi-dimensional viewpoint on things. How are you going to implement it? So you want to, as you can see from these icons, you want to gather and implement what your supplies are going to be to match your plan. How are you going to train your people so they understand what that plan is? It's not just enough to have it. It has to be executed, comprehended, and you'd have buy-in with your team. And then you're also going to have to enforce it. I think enforcement will mostly take care of itself if you can communicate and train to what those procedures are going to be. You're going to have that social pressure to reinforce what you're doing, and then the communication and performance of it all. And that's, again, where things are really going to have the most value that you can give them. Gather and implement. Determine what you can do and when you can do it. So obtaining placement and or construction of associated resources. It's not just about physical spaces. It's about the PPEs. It's about the signage. It's about even the spaces outside that help organize people as they come in. Hand sanitizer on the outside of the door or the inside of the door. You get my drift. Then there's the defining what, how, and why. So informing your staff of new systems and procedures, and the retraining process that's going to help them understand and keep in the front of their mind that they are not just what they were before, but they are what they were before plus more. Fortunately, there's been enough time between how things were and how things are going to be that it's almost like taking that long vacation where you really have to think about what you're doing. It's not so subconscious as it was before. And, I highlighted this extra part, communicating new sanitation protocols with guests. I think that people should approach this like you would your menu or any other product that you have. This is one of your assets, and your people should be able to communicate what those assets are. As awkward as it might be for some people, practicing some of these scenarios with them or as a group is going to help people dial in their narrative to be more compassionate to what people are actually asking in terms of what your sanitation protocols are. Display, project, and perform. This is one of the most important pieces that you can be considering, because after we get past phase 2 and we're into phase 3 or maybe phase 4, and God forbid we don't have another resurgence and go back into sheltering in place, the expectation is going to eventually die down, but I think this is going to become part of the norm. And so how are you displaying what you're doing? Are you projecting it in a comprehensive way? And can your people make a performance out of it? Maybe it's not enough to just have gloves, but if you can have black or blue colored gloves to really make it obvious that your people are wearing these things and not just the transparent flesh colored gloves, all of those things are going to be playing into that engendering of trust. And that's mostly the context pieces that we wanted to give you. Of course, there's always more to talk about. And so there's contact information for myself at the bottom, Andy Cook, and Derek Boogie, my chef counterpart. And then there's so many other things that are probably going to need to be considered, but we're not going to flood you with all of this information. Part of this Restaurant Restart program is covering other aspects of meeting and exceeding the expectations of the public during this COVID-19 outbreak. Upgrading your digital storefront is probably going to be the next piece to come out, and I look forward to sharing it with you. But reach out to us directly if you want support with how you're going to adapt your menu to be smaller and more executable for a greater mix of in-house and takeout business. What sort of new technologies are you going to bring into your operations, and how are they going to integrate with your other systems, and everything else? Maybe it's training, maybe it's who knows. If we can't help you, we know people who can, and so we encourage you to get a hold of us. And as you can see on the screen, we're restaurant people. We've been doing this most of our lives, and we get that the time to act for a restaurateur is the time that you're ready to act. So reach out. We'll make it work. Thanks for your time, and I can't wait to hear from you.